Welcome to the Kindred Spirits Book Club, the podcast where two grown-ass ladies geek out about Anne of Green Gables. I'm Reagan Duffy, and I'm here with my co-host, Kelly Gerner.
Hello, kindred spirits. Thanks for joining us today.
Kelly, how are you? Do you want to give our listeners a little bit of an update about how life has been going since the fire?
Sure. So, the big news is that I'm very much entering my Rachel Lynde era, which
Are
I,
you watching out your window behind the curtains?
oh, heck yes. In fact, my office faces the street, and I already have like a pretty good sense of when people are coming and going to work, but that's not exactly what I mean.
Oh, okay.
Um, I have to say, I wouldn't have guessed that I was headed for a Rachel Lynde era, but life throws some curveballs at us.
Sometimes Rachel Lynde chooses you.
Yes. So last time we talked about this, I think I told you in the Kindred Spirits that after we lost our home and our entire town in the Eaton fire last January, we made the choice to move outside of LA. So, for those of you who don't know Southern California very well, just understand that this is a gigantic metro area that stretches for 100 miles in almost every direction. And so, what we did is we pretty much packed up, well, what we
You didn't pack anything up, Kelly. You had like a duffel bag.
we put our little duffel bags together and we moved from our little town, which was kind of in north central-ish LA, to an outpost that is way, way, way south. And the reason for that is because I grew up down here and we have some very close friends who live nearby, including one friend I've known since we were about 7 years old, who now lives 3 doors down from me. And after we had lost so much community in the fire, it was really important to us to go to a place where we felt like we knew folks and we had kind of automatic community and we would fit right in. And since we're both remote workers, we had the flexibility of being able to go pretty much anywhere. But then we didn't want to be so far from our home that we couldn't get there if we needed to. So this ended up being a spot that I think fit all those criteria. So, how does this make me the new Rachel Lynde? Well, although we had rich community in Altadena, a lot of our friends and neighbors, like on our street and our block, either didn't have children or had children who were already grown. And now where we are absolutely surrounded by families with young children. And this has taken a very fun turn for us. Today, I helped out with carpool for one of my friends, and I got the whole download about a fifth grade math test. And last week, another friend's kid who's about 8 years old just sort of wandered over unannounced. It was like the classic thing out of a sitcom where like the doorbell rings, I look out the peephole, I see no one, and then I look down and there's a child. And so I welcomed him in, and he just sort of like sat down on the couch and like ate a cookie and told us that our house was quieter than his. So he intended to come here when he needed to calm down.
Love it.
And so we were like, of course, anytime. Now that I am inspired by this sort of Rachel Lindification of my life, wherein odd children just sort of come to me with their goings on, I have recently purchased an extremely elaborate cookie jar and stocked it with treats.
Yes, good.
So even with all the kind of pain and uncertainty of our housing situation overall, this part of my life is feeling really good right now.
Oh, I am really glad. I'm glad that you are finding some space for joy. Can I make two recommendations for completing the Rachel Lynde vacation?
Please.
It is one thing to receive all of the gossip about the fifth grade math test. The next piece is the distribution of
Yes, I think
gossip.
that's right.
Mrs. Rachel Lynde, as we all know, she doesn't just gather, she also distributes. So
Okay, yeah, very good point. Very good
keep that
point.
in mind, especially to interested parties. So
Mhm.
um, if you run into the fifth grade math teacher, that's where we want to see.
I see. We're taking it to that next
Yeah,
level.
yeah.
Okay, very good. Good note. Good
And
note.
two other important notes. One is you need a good apron.
Oh, yeah. No, I really do though.
So something to think about. And also, if you're not going to pick up making knitted quilts, you at least need a catchphrase. Mrs. Rachel Lynde had "That's what" that we
That's
tacked on at
what.
the end. So you can pick and choose, but I mean, Miss
Oh, yeah.
Cornelia also has a little
Just like a
catchphrase.
man.
right? Isn't that just like a man?
Mhm.
So I don't know. You can
I'm gonna work on this. I think that I do need some sort of catchphrase just any time that we need to signal that the wisdom has come to an end.
right, right. Something specific to you
I'm
that
done making my pronouncements.
lets the listeners know that Mrs. Rachel Lynn has entered the chat.
Oh.
Okay, so mull it over.
I'm gonna mull it over. I have had people tell me that I say the expression "it is what it is" a lot. I don't know if that's gonna be
Um,
my catchphrase, but I'll take it under advisement.
it's not a bad one to use with children. Like that's not bad. I wouldn't say you use it so much that it makes me think of you.
Okay. Yeah. All right. We'll keep working on it.
Okay. You know what? Focus group test a few things. See what happens. See what pops.
I'll have to ask the many children who are now part of with it.
Ask the fifth grade class. But let's move into today's episode. Today, we are recapping The Golden Road. The Golden Road was published in 1913, which is 2 years after The Story Girl, and it continues all of the Story Girl adventures with the King family. Before we get started, though, if you are enjoying this podcast, we would love to invite you to get more engaged. You can do this a couple of ways. You can rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. That will help other kindred spirits find us. We would be very grateful for a 5-star rating and any glowing reviews you would love to leave. Or you can tell a friend about the podcast, share about us on social media, or tell your book club about us. You can also follow us on Instagram for updates about episodes, fun bookish contents like shelfies and memes, and links to all of our recommendations. We are kindredspirits.bookclub on Instagram. And finally, you can always reach out to us with questions, feedback, ideas for future episodes, either by DMing us on Instagram or emailing us at kindredspirits.bookclub@gmail.com. We love to hear from you.
We absolutely do. So let's get started. Our kindred spirit for this episode has to be our fearless narrator, Beverly. In The Story Girl, Bev is just kind of a stand in for Maud's voice in a lot of ways, and he doesn't have that much personality himself. And that's kind of true in The Golden Road, but to a much lesser extent. We come to find out that Bev is observant and romantic in his own way, that he notices and appreciates the world around him and the people in it. His cousin, the story girl, comes to see him as an especially close kindred spirit, someone who will romp with her through the woods on a perfect autumn afternoon, or take a midnight walk, and appreciate the beauty and mystery of those moments. We also see that Bev has a great voice for irony, calling out hypocrisy among his cousins, and perfectly capturing the dry humor in Felicity and Dan's bickering, or in Uncle Roger's bon mots. And finally, we see Bev's dedication to completing the story by entreating a grown-up story girl to finally tell the tale of the love story of the awkward man.
Our quote of the episode is from the foreword that starts the book, and it builds on the first line from the Story Girl book. First line in the Story Girl was, "I do like a road because you can be always wondering what's at the end of it." And this book starts with a rumination on that same theme. Once upon a time, we all walked on the Golden Road. It was a fair highway through the land of lost delight. Shadow and sunshine were blessedly mingled, and every turn and dip revealed a fresh charm and a new loveliness to eager hearts and unspoiled eyes. We may long have left the Golden Road behind, but its memories are the dearest of our eternal possessions, and those who cherish them as such may haply find a pleasure in the pages of this book, whose people are pilgrims on the Golden Road of youth. So let's get right into our recap of The Golden Road, the follow-up book to The Story Girl. And The Golden Road picks up in November, right after The Story Girl has ended. The cast of characters is the same. The King siblings, practical, laconic Dan, imperious, beautiful Felicity, and sweet, moral Cecily. The two King cousins from Toronto, living on the King farm while their father is working internationally. Our narrator, Bev, and his brother, Felix. And then on the adjoining property is another King cousin, Sarah Stanley, also known as the Story Girl, captivating and talented. And Peter Craig, Uncle Roger's hired boy, smart and ambitious despite his poor circumstances. Down the lane is the neighbor, anxious and tearful Sarah Ray, although she gets a lot less airtime in this book. When we last left them, Peter had just recovered from a near-death experience of the measles, and they had finally opened the famous blue chest, filled with remnants from a thwarted love story. Now, Winter is truly creeping in. The kids are all just a little older, and they're at that age where the 6 months that have just passed in The Story Girl has seemed like a lifetime to them. And maturity is starting to show up in surprising leaps forward. We start the book in the cozy kitchen on a cold, wet evening. The kids are laughing themselves silly, playing blind man's buff. But Peter has been throwing the game by letting himself get caught easily, so it could be his turn to be the blind man, and he can then catch Felicity, which he unerringly does. Quoth Bev, "What remarkable goose said that love is blind? Love can see through 5 folds of closely woven muffler with ease."
Great line.
That is a great line. Go, Peter.
Peter is pretty single-mindedly focused on Felicity in this book, I will say.
The kids take a break from the game, Cecily too red-cheeked and too easily out of breath. Then Bev casually proposes a new winter activity for the little group. It's an idea that Bev and the Story Girl have cooked up together, but they've decided that Bev should introduce it as solely his idea, knowing that Felicity would be sure to shoot it down if the Story Girl brought it up. And where goeth Felicity, goeth Peter. And without Felicity and Peter, it's no fun. Bev suggests that their winter project should be a homemade newspaper that the kids write themselves. The Story Girl cleverly baits Felicity into it by pretending she thinks it's a silly idea, and she doesn't think they have the capability of making it happen. Felicity snaps up the bait in a heartbeat. She's in immediate favor of the project, Peter following suit, chiming in that his beloved Aunt Jane had been on the newspaper at Queen's. And for a moment, Felicity's snappishness almost cost them Dan's buy-in. But the Story Girl pretends to be persuaded, so they're all in. Cecily suggests the name Our Magazine so they can include Peter and Sarah Ray, and they divvy up assignments. Bev will be the editor-in-chief, and will also edit the scrapbook department and write the editorials. The rest take charge of editing different departments. Bev assigns them for Max comic effect. Dan is put in charge of the etiquette column. Felicity, the household hints. Felix, the jokes and information department. Cecily, the fashion department. The Story Girl takes the personals department. Peter, the fiction and poetry department. And poor left out Sarah Ray gets assigned the advertising department as an afterthought, not being present to advocate for herself.
Absolutely typical.
They literally are like, oh, wait, Sarah Ray, what can she do? Advertising?
Once the issue of the magazine is settled, the Story Girl starts in with a news story about some local star-crossed lovers and revealed that she learned the story from the awkward man himself. She's bumped into him in the woods, where he was sitting by the spring and writing in a little notebook. After chatting for a bit, she outright asks what he writes in the book, sharing that the town gossips say he writes poetry. The awkward man says he writes a little of everything in it, and he shares the story of Ursula and Kenneth from his book. In the story, Ursula was the beautiful daughter of a rich and proud man, and Kenneth was a young sea captain in the next settlement, and the two were in love. But Ursula's father was against the match because Kenneth's father had beaten him in an election years before either Ursula or Kenneth were born. And so he forbade Kenneth from the house. The two could meet in secret only rarely. Finally, Kenneth invites Ursula to run away with him because his ship will leave next Saturday on a trip to Buenos Aires. Ursula agrees, and Kenneth plans that at the dance on Friday, he will hide in the fir grove behind the house with 2 horses, and Ursula should steal away from the dance where they will ride to Charlottetown. A minister in Charlottetown would marry them, and then they will be off at dawn on Kenneth's ship. Ursula asks what is going to happen if she doesn't come to meet him, and Kenneth says he will sail away and it will be a year before he returns. The lovers' plan is foiled by Malcolm Ramsey, a homely neighbor youth who had tried to court Ursula, and Ursula despised him. He has tattled to her father about the plan, so he locks her in her room. Ursula despairs of getting a message to Kenneth, but luckily, a young man pops by to consult with her father on business. Ursula seizes a ball of gray yarn, writes a note to Kenneth, and winds it into the ball of yarn. And then, when the young man leaves, she heaves it at him as he unties his horse. She has good aim and smacks him with the yarn, and she then gestures to him to keep it quiet. So he rides off with that ball of yarn. She has no idea if her gambit works and whether or not he's going to think to look inside the yarn and then find the note and pass the note on to Kenneth until that night at midnight. She hears a patter of gravel on her window and she peers out to see Kenneth waiting for her, and they still have time to ride to Charlottetown. They made it on time and they sailed off as husband and wife. I love this story. Besides this being a sweet love story, in the telling of it, we get a lot of glimpses to the current state of the relationships amongst the kids. In particular, we see that hostilities are barely kept at a simmer between Felicity and the story girl, with Felicity disapproving of any of the heroine's actions that aren't proper enough for her standards, and the story girl twitting Felicity back. And we see that Felicity's judgmentalness and bossiness has definitely ratcheted up another notch since the last book. I don't see how Felicity couldn't be excited about her throwing the yarn with the secret note at him. That's so clever and cool.
Honestly, here's the problem is that if somebody else was telling the story, she may very well have gotten into it. If she had read it in a romance book herself,
Yep.
she might be, but because it's the story girl telling the story and thus approving of Ursula's actions, I think
Mm-hmm.
that Felicity can't help herself. We know this with Felicity. When the chips are really down, she doesn't necessarily believe all of this stuff that she's
No.
saying about propriety. But here she calls Ursula like practically a hussy.
Yes. No, she thinks that Ursula's behavior is the height of unladylikeness.
Scandalocious.
Yeah. Scandalocious.
So we move into the excitement of Christmas. Peter even gets to stay to celebrate the day with them. Really, they've kind of dispensed with Peter's mom entirely this whole book, so he basically just is there all the time. The story girl gets a large box from her father filled with wonderful things from Paris, including another red silk dress and matching red satin slippers. And that makes Felicity the kind of envious that shows up as scorn. The story girl, however, is delighted and saying that she feels inspired and clever when she wears red. She also gets a book from the Awkward Man, clearly one from his own collection, which is used and marked in. The story girl knows that this is a treasure, although Felicity doesn't see it. Peter is over the moon that Felicity has made him a bookmark, one that she worked a temperance motto into it. Felicity later confides in Bev that as there are rumors that Peter's father drank, she thought she ought to warn him.
Yikes, Felicity.
In the evening, they all go to Kitty Marr's party. We get a little hint that Cecily has grown even more delicate, and Uncle Alec let them go to the party over Aunt Janet's objections because Cecily had so wanted to go. On the way home from the party, Peter boldly asks Felicity if he can see her home, and she lets him. The two of them walk off together. We hear from Bev that he wishes he could do the same with the story girl, but he wasn't feeling quite as brave. So instead, the rest of the kids all walk together, and the story girl shares the story of the Christmas harp. On New Year's Eve, the kids all gather in the kitchen again, even Sarah Ray. The boys kind of dread it when Sarah Ray comes in the evening because it means one of them will have to walk her home at the end of the night, and they know that she will tell everyone at school that she was seen home by a king boy. The kids decide they will all make resolutions and will put a roll of honor in their magazine to celebrate those who keep their resolutions. As the kids discuss their resolutions, Felicity snipes at each one, opining on the need for each resolution, implying that she doesn't have any similar failings, or suggesting to Dan that he resolved not to eat any more poison berries.
Ugh.
They all make some fairly typical resolutions. Bev vows not to lose his temper. Peter, perhaps inspired by Felicity's bookmark, vows to never get drunk. Cecily wants to improve her mind by reading good books and listening to older people. Felix vows to say what he always thinks and not to eat apples. And whether that's because he wants to lose weight or because he's still smarting after the bitter apple situation, he doesn't specify. The story girl wants to not be jealous, to not mind when she is interrupted when telling stories, to have all the good times she can, and to learn to cook. There are also resolutions to study certain subjects more, to behave in church. Dan resolves not to get mad at Felicity if he can help it, and he breaks that 2 seconds later after she scoffs at him. Felicity, for her part, does not feel like she needs much improving at all, but since she wants to get on the roll of honor, she vows to think a beautiful thought every morning before breakfast. Cecily has a very sweet resolution to only believe half of what she hears, and when questioned which half, she says the best half.
Cecily is too sweet for all of us. So, the first edition of their magazine is ready to go on New Year's Day, and the kids are all tremendously proud of themselves. There are essays and true stories, personal notes, and a howler of an etiquette column written by Dan, jokes and fashion notes. These magazines are very, very fun to read, but Unfortunately, they don't really translate well to us reading them out loud or trying to recap them. So just go back, you guys. If for no other reason, read these magazines. They're so fun. And if you pay attention to them, they do give some fun story details that are left out of the narrative. It's also really great seeing all their personalities shining through in their writing. And since the story girl is limited to the personal space, the other kids' storytelling abilities also get a moment to shine. And so their spelling errors.
I thought that was actually very clever of Maud because the story girl is so like nobody else really tells stories because
Yeah.
she so firmly claimed that space that this is a way to get the other kids' perspectives and the other kids get a chance to share. They all take turns, for instance, writing their most exciting adventure for the magazine. And so getting a chance to hear some of those little stories in their voices, I thought this was a clever way of getting that in.
I think these are really, really fun. It's a cute narrative device and one that makes this book a lot of fun to read.
Our next chapter is Great Aunt Eliza's visit, which had been foreshadowed in the first magazine. They had been anticipating a visit from this fabled grumpy aunt who is rumored to be very deaf and who does not like children, and also apparently enjoys inflicting surprise visits on her family. And so, on a cold day in February, all the grown-ups have gone off to Charlottetown, and the kids are enjoying keeping house for themselves, planning to get all their chores done in the morning and then have fun in the afternoon. But they've barely gotten through finishing the taffy when they spot a tall, gray-haired lady coming towards the house. Felicity leaps into action. This is where she shines. She gets the kids hustling to tidy the house in the 2 minutes of warning they have. And then, knowing that Aunt Eliza is very deaf, Felicity greets her by yelling, "How do you do, Aunt Eliza?" at the very top of her lungs as she opens the door. Aunt Eliza looks vaguely puzzled, but comes in to have the offered tea, sharing that she can only stay a few hours and so will miss all the grown-ups. The kids do their best to entertain Aunt Eliza, all yelled at the top of their lungs. And now, because they assume that Aunt Eliza can't hear them when they speak in a normal tone, the kids feel free to do things like talk about Aunt Eliza's looks. Peter noting, she wouldn't be bad looking if it weren't for her nose. It's too long and crooked besides. And speculating that she's rumored to be miserly, so is likely to only take the cheapest space for 5 cents on the missionary quilt square that Cecily is embroidering. Missionary quilt square is used to raise money. Folks can donate money, and depending on how much they donate, their name will be embroidered in a more or less prominent space on the quilt square. Felicity suggests that while she's getting the tea, including making a pan of rusks, the other kids should show Aunt Eliza the family album to entertain her.
In case you were wondering, as we were, what rusks are, according to the current internet, they're basically a twice baked bread or cake, so something similar to biscotti. Here, Felicity sends the story girl to get some stale bread from her house to make into rusks in service of Aunt Eliza's famously touchy digestive system. Now, the story girl is very sulky, as her storytelling would not be effective, yelled at top volume, so she cedes the floor to Cecily. As Cecily valiantly tackles the task of yell narrating the family album to Aunt Eliza, Dan decides he might as well have a little fun. Dan sits behind Aunt Eliza and starts a running commentary on the family photo discussion, the rest of the kids trying vainly to stifle their howls of laughter. For each family member Cecily shouts out, Dan offers nuggets like, he's the man who was asked if someone else said something in sincerity, and old Joe said, nope, he said it in my cellar. So these little choice tidbits go on for half an hour. Dan is even adding in impersonations of these old family members, which is just making the other kids crack up. Luckily, at that moment, Felicity interrupts, and she and Cecily have a quick but audible conference about what to do with the fact that Patty the cat has trod through molasses left out on a plate and then walked over Aunt Eliza's coat, leaving sticky footprints. The girls figure out how to clean it up, luckily, and they all sit down to tea. Now, Aunt Eliza has a hearty appetite and tucks right in, and the kids kind of start to relax, almost forgetting her presence. The story girl entertains them with a story about the early days of the PEI colony and the then governor's wife who died of a broken heart. Felicity also drops in the knowledge that the current governor's wife is a very distant relation of theirs, a second cousin of Uncle Alec, and apparently, when they were young, they were quite in love with each other. She had once overheard Aunt Olivia teasing Uncle Alec about it. Felicity concludes that she fell out of love with him. Quote, I guess she was pretty fickle. And then he met Aunt Janet, who was twice as good looking. They decide that the current governor's wife missed out because the governor is fat and bald and red-faced. Eventually, Tea ends, and Aunt Eliza readies to leave. Cecily gifts her a bag of little dried rose leaves to say thank you for buying a 10-cent section of her missionary quilt square. The kids are relieved, and they reflect that Aunt Eliza was odd as predicted, but a different kind of odd than they expected her to be.
When the grown-ups return, Aunt Janet immediately says, "And so you had the governor's wife to tea?"
Wait, what?
Yes. Everyone is confused. No, no, they hosted Aunt Eliza this afternoon. Aunt Janet relates, no, no, Aunt Eliza was still in Charlottetown. They had tea with her. But they ran into Mrs. Governor Leslie on her way back to Charlottetown, and she told them that she had just been to tea with all of the kids. Turns out she had been visiting a friend in town and thought she'd pop in to see Uncle Alec for old time's sake. Our little gang is shocked and appalled and embarrassed, remembering all of the things they said in front of her and how they yelled constantly at her.
Okay, who do we think is the most embarrassed? Dan, who's like revealing family secrets, thinking she can't hear. Felicity, who's gossiping about how the current governor is, what did she say, old and fat and red faced.
Yep.
I mean, all of them, I think, are probably feeling pretty ashamed.
But luckily for them, a letter arrives the next day in which the governor's wife apologizes for fooling them. Just couldn't resist the temptation. She says she had a delightful time, that Dan's commentary was refreshing, Felicity's rusks were perfect. She wants the recipe, and Cecily's dried roses smell divine. She invites them to come see her at the government house and says that the governor wants his name in the 10-cent section of Cecily's quilt square. So that is quite the coup for Cecily. Overall, it seems like it all worked out okay in the end, but there is a final humiliation lurking for Felicity. And Janet asks her, how was she able to get her rusks to turn out so well when there wasn't any baking powder left? Felicity says she found another can on the top shelf, and the signature lack of labeling systems strikes again because Aunt Janet says, no, that's tooth powder in that can, left over from when cousin Myra broke her bottle of tooth powder on a visit. Felicity is horrified, and Dan is totally gearing up to remind her of this every time she acts imperious about cooking ever again.
Again, the lack of labeling. We will never, ever get over this.
No. I was a little curious though about the rusks recipe thing
Hmm.
because I had learned that they were twice baked bread. So I went searching for a similar recipe, and all of the ones that I found seemed to be referencing that it's very South African in origin. I guess it's a very common treat there. And all of the recipes did include baking powder, but that's because these recipes were starting from like baking the dough from scratch and then twice baking it, like you would make biscotti, like you make the
Right.
dough and then you twice bake it. But in this episode here, Felicity seems to be starting from already stale bread and so would just need to like bake it again, maybe tossing it with some flavorings or something like that. So it wouldn't need a raising agent. It wouldn't need to rise. It's already baked. So any recipes that I found that start from already made bread or cake, basically you just slice it into like sticks or cubes and bake it low and slow until it's crispy and dry. So I'm not sure why she would need baking powder, but since tooth powder at the time would probably contain baking soda, it probably works just fine as a raising agent anyway.
Next, we move into March, and the kids head over to Cousin Maddie's for a delicious, if dutiful, dinner. Cousin Maddie lives some 6 miles away, but there's a shortcut across the fields and woods that make it a more doable 3 miles. As they all trudge over, we find out that Dan, in response to his New Year's resolution regarding keeping his temper with Felicity, has stumbled on a brilliant method. Quote, he invariably met her criticisms with a good natured grin and a flippant remark with some tender epithet tagged onto it. For example, responding, do you really think so, my angel? When Felicity is combative about his position that Ebenezer isn't a very nice name. This makes Felicity absolutely furious, thus guaranteeing that Dan will continue this in perpetuity. And honestly, this is probably the only way of dealing effectively with Felicity's current oppositional nature.
I kind of love the idea that they are old and they're grandparents by now. And anytime they're together and Felicity is a little crotchety, Dan calls her like my angel.
My darling, my sweet. He really comes up with like every lovely name to her in the book, and it is so funny. And as a sibling who was constantly antagonizing my younger brothers, I can see how this worked. So the kids have a nice dinner with cousin Maddie and they head home early ahead of a storm that's off in the distance. But remember, they are quite a ways away from home and it begins to snow after they've only gone a mile. They think that they must be close enough to home to just plow through, but that storm picks up and becomes a blinding snowstorm before they've gone another half mile. They become lost as the path they are following becomes snowed over and the driving snow obliterates all the landmarks in the distance. It's pitch dark, they are freezing and exhausted, and they just sort of keep stumbling along, sure that they are going to freeze to death if they stop moving. Finally, Felix sees a light in the distance, and they hurry toward it, only to discover that the light is coming from Peg Bowen's house. If you remember, Peg Bowen is the reputed witch who cursed Patty, and to whom the children had left gifts to entreat her to heal Patty, but then they just ran away from her in sheer terror.
They have no choice. They have to knock on the door. Peg brings them in and settles them in a motley assortment of chairs of varying levels of ricketiness.
Oh
And she's
boy.
trying and she's trying her best to be hospitable, but her hospitality leaves rather a lot to be desired. She makes a disgusting ginger brew for Cecily, who is shivering worse than the rest of them. She easily takes offense if the kids try to refuse anything she offers them. Peg has an assortment of pets, 6 cats, a dog with 3 legs, a crow, and a hen, and somewhere hiding a shy pet rat, much to the horror of the girls. And she seems to know everything and also is in no way tactful. She says some very harsh things about the story girl's dad and about Felix's weight. She also bluntly says to Cecily that she looks delicate. She doubts she will live to grow up. Cecily is shook, and Dan bluntly tells Peg to shut up. Peg seems impressed with his boldness, not offended. Peg knows that Peter's dad had run off and says he'll be coming home before long. Peg says that Aunt Olivia will be getting married soon. She knows that Cecily is collecting names for her missionary quilt square and she wants a 10-cent section, but she'll pay her later. The kids are pretty spooked, looking at the skull in the corner, a skull that is rumored to be where Peg gets all her information and foreshadowing from. And then the wind picks up and screams around the house. Peg leans forward and grabs Bev by the wrist, and she seems possessed. Her eyes get wild, and she speaks in a harsh whisper, ranting that the wind is the only free thing in the world. And then her voice rises to an uncanny shriek. Then all of a sudden, she lapses into silence and covers herself with her coat, just sits silent in her chair. Everyone is frozen for the next half an hour, and then Peg suddenly jumps up and says, "It's time for bed." The girls can share the bed while Peg takes the sofa, and the boys can sleep in a pile of straw downstairs. No one sleeps well, although the boys fare a little better since Peg snores, the bed reeks of tobacco smoke, and the fire makes scary shadows on the wall all night. Finally, morning comes. The oatmeal Peg serves them is solid as a rock and tastes a little soapy because she had dropped the soap in it while she was cooking. Cecily can't eat because she's already developed a terrible cold, and the rest choke it down out of fear of giving offense. They make their excuses to hustle home and avoid the Irish stew that Peg is threatening to make for dinner. Before they leave, Peg gives Cecily a wishbone, saying whatever she wishes on it will come true, but she only gets one wish, so don't waste it. They head home, and despite this harrowing ordeal, it's already starting to turn into a good story, although they still can't be sure if Peg is just strange or actually a witch. Dan is already getting some mileage out of it by teasing Felicity. He says, "Is soap in porridge any worse than tooth powder in rusks, lovely creature?"
Oh, Dan. We next get to see extracts from the February and March issues of Our magazine. Of note, the role of honor in regards to resolutions requires an editorial amendment that only Felicity is on it because no one can verify that she has a beautiful thought every morning, since she won't share what her thoughts are, and she only had that one resolution. Felicity! So there's an honorable mention list for keeping at least one resolution perfect, and that includes Felix, Peter, and Sarah Ray. We also find out that there are some new additions to town. A Cyrus Brisk has joined their school and has made it clear that he has a crush on Cecily, which she hates. And a Miss Alice Reed has come to town to teach music lessons. There are several odes to Miss Reed in the magazine, a prosaic one by Felix and a poetic one by Cecily. All the girls are clearly enamored by the new music teacher. As spring starts springing in April, spirits are high. Peter asks for advice on writing an ode to Felicity for her birthday to be put in the next issue of the magazine, and Cyrus Brisk is relentlessly pursuing Cecily at school, and she feels absolutely plagued by his attention. She's as rude to him as she's capable of being, so not very rude, but she does try. But then tragedy strikes. Patty, their cat, is missing. At first, they figure he's gone out adventuring, but he's usually back within a day or so. So by the third day, they get all worried, and by the fourth day, they are truly upset. The kids search everywhere, and the not knowing what has happened to him is torturous. After about 2 weeks of Patty being missing, the group has given up all hope. Peg has gone off on her usual springtime roamabout, so she's not home to appeal to. Suddenly, Cecily remembers the wishbone that Peg had given to her. She rushes upstairs to get it. Peg had instructed her to hold the wishbone in both hands, walk backward, repeating the wish 9 times, and then turn around 9 times from right to left, and the wish would come true right away. Dan is skeptical, and so is everyone else, except for Peter and Cecily. So she invokes the wishbone, chanting, "I wish that we may find Patty alive, or else his body, so we can bury him decently." And while they are all skeptical, by the time she's finished her 9th turn around, they can't help but hope in the little wishbone. They look down the lane, half expecting Patty to be trotting on up it, and instead they see the awkward man coming up. He arrives at the gate and asks them whether they had recently lost a cat. He describes Patty exactly and says he's alive over at his home, which is called Golden Milestone. He says he has an old barn that he rarely goes in and that there's a barrel there upside down, one side propped up on a piece of wood. And today when he went in, he noticed that the barrel had been moved and was no longer propped up, but instead entirely on the floor. When he picked it up, he discovered a cat under it. He was dreadfully thin and too weak to make a sound, but the awkward man brought him home and got him drinking some milk, and he's been eating more throughout the day, so he thinks he will pull through. He thinks that Patty maybe chased a mouse under the barrel and knocked it off the block, trapping himself. The kids all hurry over to Golden Milestone, and there is Patty in the kitchen, skin and bone, but he purrs joyfully as the story girl scoops him up. They are jubilant as they carry him home, but they do debate whether the wishbone had worked its magic or not. Dan says it's obviously a coincidence because the awkward man had already found Patty and was on his way over when Cecily made the wish. But Peter isn't so sure the wishbone didn't have something to do with it after all.
To celebrate the safe return home of Patty the cat, the kids all have a picnic on a gorgeous spring day. The story girl tells a story, Felicity and Dan bicker, Cecily plays peacemaker. They all check in with each other on their New Year's resolutions. Cecily feels that she hasn't kept hers very well. Felicity says, well, she's had no problem keeping her resolution to think a beautiful thought before breakfast. And the other kids kind of roll their eyes at this. But the story girl does seem to consider it seriously and agrees, saying, there are times when I can't think anything but gray thoughts. Then other days I think pink and blue and gold and purple and rainbow thoughts all the time. Felicity is a little taken aback by this pronouncement that thoughts have colors, and she pushes back on it. But the story girl explains pretty specifically that in her mind, every thought has a color. When she thinks of Peter, she sees yellow in her mind. She explains that, quote, Cecily is a very sweet pink, like those Mayflowers, and Sarah Ray is a very pale blue, and Dan is red, and Felix is yellow like Peter, and Bev is striped. They all giggle at the idea that Bev is striped, and Felicity, of course, demands to know what color she is. Reluctantly, the story girl tells her that she's a rainbow of colors, knowing that Felicity will be very satisfied by this answer. And the story girl concludes, you needn't laugh at Bev. His stripes are beautiful. It isn't he that is striped. It's just the thought of him. Peg Bowen is a queer sort of yellowish green, and the awkward man is lilac, and Aunt Olivia is pansy purple mixed with gold, and Uncle Roger is navy blue.
I remember reading this segment as a kid and just sort of thinking like, oh, the story girl is so like sensitive and imaginative, and this seeing colors thing is probably just like metaphor for how she felt about like the people in her world. But as an adult, I've learned about synesthesia, which is when your brain routes sensory information through like unrelated senses, which will cause you to experience more than one sense simultaneously. And so there are many people who can experience their senses in this way, and it kind of like creates this rich sensory experience. You hear something that's making you see colors. There's just like lots of different versions of this. But the one that I'm most familiar with is sound color synesthesia, which is where you see specific colors when you hear certain sounds or music. There are many different forms of synesthesia, and it kind of sounds to me like the story girl has some form of it.
Yeah, it really does. I feel like it's often color related, whether it's
Yeah.
sound is color, or I think I've seen the ones where letters or words are like it's related to reading and certain letters are certain colors.
I was reading online about this because I don't know that much about it, but I guess the most common form of synesthesia is where small words like ands and its and things like that, those words have a color. So when you're reading, those little small connections vector words are just show up to you as a color, I guess, in addition to the word, which I can imagine really like facilitates comprehension. But this makes me wonder if Maud had synesthesia or maybe if she just knew someone who did. It wouldn't surprise me at all if she was a person with synesthesia. But just Maud's writing is so richly colorful. I don't think I ever told you this, Reagan, but when we were reading the Anne series, I kind of had it in my mind that I wanted to like make an art project of my Anne books where I would color the edges of the pages in my book, whatever color had been mentioned on the page, and then keep that color consistent until another color was mentioned, and then put that color that was mentioned on the page and keep
Uh,
going that way. I thought it had like this really beautiful like rainbow effect of all the pages just
right, right.
reflecting all the different colors in the book. I did this for like 3 pages and had to give up the project because she mentions so many colors on each page that it's like it was very hard to decide, okay, well, wait, what colors am I using? And is it just going to be for one page? Is it going to be half a page? How am I doing this? And then also that she mentions colors that were so specific that I did not have the right like artistic materials to
I,
capture the colors she mentioned.
you're
Like an
like,
8-pack of Crayola
right.
markers. I mean, she's such a colorful writer, like in the most literal sense. I wouldn't be surprised if that was something that was also kind of going on in her brain.
Oh, I love that. That's fascinating.
After the excitement of losing Patty, the rest of spring passes uneventfully, and the kids are starting to get bored, right? They're getting that like sort of restless, wishing for something to happen to them thing. Our narrator, Adult Bev, tells us that much more was happening than they could have appreciated as children. Quote, "It was a time of wonder and marvel, of the soft touch of silver rain on greening fields, of the incredible delicacy of young leaves, of blossom in field and garden and wood. The whole world bloomed in a flush and tremor of maiden loveliness, instinct with all the evasive, fleeting charm of spring and girlhood and young morning. We felt and enjoyed it all without understanding or analyzing it. It was enough to be glad and young with spring on the golden road."
It's not long before something does happen, something very interesting indeed. Aunt Olivia is getting married. How did Peg Bowen know?
How did she know?
Maybe Peg is just really tapped into the gossip of the community. Aunt Olivia is marrying Dr. Seaton. The story girl will be a bridesmaid and then come to live with the other King cousins. Felicity is a bit jealous that her cousin gets to be a bridesmaid, but she's looking forward to all the cooking and baking that will come with the wedding. The wedding consumes all their attention in the weeks to come. Aunt Olivia will be married under her tree in the King family orchard, a small detail that we absolutely love, as it once more underscores the connection to nature in these books. The girls are mostly concerned with what they will wear, particularly Sarah Ray, who's afraid she won't get a new dress for the occasion. But even bigger news comes to the little band when Peter comes to tell them that his father has come home. How did Peg know?
How did Peg know? Peg.
As you may recollect, Peter's father had run off when he was quite young, leaving his mother to work as a washerwoman and Peter to work as a hired boy for Aunt Olivia and Uncle Roger. Now, conveniently, just in time for Aunt Olivia's wedding, we'll point out, his father has returned, converted and sober, and has pledged to take care of his family from now on. After Peter finishes his commitment to Uncle Roger in the fall, Peter is to go live with his parents full time, and his mother will no longer work outside the home. This is actually quite destabilizing for Peter. It appears that his mom is all in, having forgiven her husband and welcomed him home. She's tired.
Yeah, she's tired. Exactly right. She's all like, no more washing clothes. I'm done. This is fine for me.
Peter also wants to be generous, but he's worried. He's worried his father won't stay. He's worried that he'll be separated from his friends once he goes back to living at home. And he has to go to the Markdale school. And even more so, his father has converted to the Methodist faith. And as we recall from the first book, Peter became a Presbyterian on Judgment Day. So now he's worried about how he will tell his father, but he is resolute that he must do so. The kids tell him that it wouldn't exactly be the end of the world if Peter also converted to Methodism, because truly there wasn't that much of a difference. Or if Peter just attended the Methodist church for now until he was old enough to make his own choice. Because honestly, it often seems in Maud's books that clearly Methodists come to the Presbyterian church and vice versa. You go to your own church, but if there was something good happening at the other church or you couldn't get to your church, then it was fine to go to the other one.
Every time there was some kind of a dust up in Rainbow Valley involving the minister's kids, it was when like half the Methodist church just happened to be there for some reason.
Right. Peter refuses to lie about this. He takes his Presbyterianism very seriously. He said when he was choosing, he wasn't, once he chose, he was going to stay committed. He would not be changing his mind.
He's a very staunch little fellow when it comes to all this.
He really, really is. But also, is he so firm in this because he kind of feels like this is one way to stay close with his friends at church and in Sunday school? And he's not sure he wants to give that up.
It could be, right? I mean, he knows he's not going to go to school with them. He's not going to get to see them as often. So maybe this is the one thing he's kind of holding on to.
It's certainly a connection between them because they
Yep.
were the ones who brought him to church in the first place and spent all last book debating all sorts of religious and ethical dilemmas. So,
I mean, after all of the hard work that he put into becoming a Presbyterian, I mean, I completely understand why he is holding on to this.
right.
Like, this was a very considered choice.
There's also this short little scene between Cecily and Sarah Ray where Sarah Ray confides to Cecily that she's sure she won't grow up pretty. And Cecily says she's sure Sarah Ray won't be homely, but it would help if Sarah Ray didn't cry all the time. Cecily!
You can tell that Cecily might be a little bit at her wit's end with her little friend.
Right.
We just discussed Cyrus Brisk. He's new to the Carlisle school and he is an ardent admirer of Cecily's. He is leaving notes in all of Cecily's school books and carving her name into the apple trees on his father's farm. Cecily does not care for this attention at all. It's not just the attention she's getting from Cyrus, it's also the attention that she's getting from all the other school children as a result of Cyrus's dogged pursuit of her. So we get some not so great takes from Felicity, who is very unsympathetic to her little sister's plight, and tells Cecily that she must have encouraged Cyrus somehow. Felicity, once again, not a girl's girl.
Not only is she not a girl's girl, she just spent all last book being pissy about Peter having a crush on her and being like, I don't want any part of his attention, and not being like, I'm not encouraging it. And in fact, being very specific that she's not encouraging him, even though
Yep,
kind of she is,
yep.
Felicity.
Felicity. Cyrus's crush on Cecily escalates to the point that he steals a lock of her hair. He does not go about this in a romantic way. This is actually like kind of a violent assault on her. She and her friend Kitty are leaning their hair out the window. They have some idea that like their hair will be healthier or shinier if it's in the sun. But Cyrus sneaks up, grabs Cecily's braid, and he just like chops the end off of it. This is actually like quite a violation. And Cecily is really hurt by this, as anyone would be, and she cries all afternoon. Dan vows to fight Cyrus to make him give the hair back, but that's not really the point. Cecily doesn't want the hair back, she just wants this to stop, and she also doesn't want the attention that would come from a fight. Plus, she knows that if the boys fought, she would somehow get in trouble for it. Soon thereafter, Cyrus decides to pass Cecily a note in class under the nose of their very strict teacher. Now, his MO was usually to put these little love notes in Cecily's books, but today, I don't know, he's feeling bold and he passes it to her through like a path of other students.
He is
So,
clearly escalating here.
yes, exactly. Exactly right. The teacher notices the little note being passed, and upon discovering that the intended recipient was Cecily, the teacher calls Cecily up to the front of the class. She bravely refuses to reveal who sent her the note. Well, maybe it was bravery, or maybe she just didn't want any kind of connection to Cyrus. Who knows? But in response to that, the teacher forces her to copy the entire note onto the blackboard, including the signature line for all to see. Cecily is completely mortified by this punishment, and so much so that she actually stands up to the teacher and tells him she won't do it. He should have known that the note was truly not something that should have been shared just based on her response.
Right. I can't imagine Cecily frequently gets in trouble.
Right. He tells Cecily that she either has to write out the whole note on the blackboard in front of everybody or spend the rest of the day sitting next to Cyrus Brisk. Cecily is now caught between a rock and a hard place. She decides to copy out the note on the blackboard rather than sit next to this boy who has been harassing her for weeks. And here is where Cecily, in her meek little way, gets her revenge on Cyrus. Because when she copies out his note, she copies it out exactly with all of his spelling and grammar errors intact. The pettiness. Cecily is a girl after my own heart. So the whole school is cracking up, right? Including the teacher who's like turning away from the class, but they see his shoulders shaking. Once Cecily signs for Cyrus and it's revealed that he wrote the note, he too is also punished. Now, Cecily's embarrassment does carry on for a little while longer until she realizes that Cyrus is not bothering her anymore. His sister later on explained to Cecily that he finally realized she must not like him if she would rather embarrass both of them by copying out that note on the blackboard than sit next to him for just an afternoon.
Yes.
So, yeah, way to take a hint, Cyrus. I do like that we get this fun little coda on Cyrus's life story. I have no idea why Maud throws this in, but I think it's a little funny. Quote, quite early in life, he wedded a stout, rosy, buxom lass, the very antithesis of his first love. He prospered in his undertakings, raised a large and respectable family, and was eventually appointed a justice of the peace, which was all very sensible of Cyrus. So there you go, just in case you were worried about his future endeavors.
Well, on Peter's birthday, he decides he must make up his mind to tell his father that he's a Presbyterian, not a Methodist. It goes fine. His father is fine with it, so long as Peter's a Protestant, he says. Felicity notices out loud that Peter is growing up to be very handsome. Oh, hey. And then the story girl arrives, fresh from a visit from Miss Alice Reed's home. The story girl tells the others a story connected to the home. When she visited, an elderly man who seemed to be quite sorrowful had been sitting in Miss Reed's garden on a stone bench underneath a couple of pear trees. Miss Reed told the story girl about Miss Reed's Aunt Una and her lover. Aunt Una was a beautiful young girl, and when he had last saw her, they were about to be married on her 20th birthday. But she became ill and died, and on her birthday she was buried instead of married. For the last 40 years, her fiance has made a June pilgrimage to her garden where he sits in silence on the bench. He never married, remaining faithful to the memory of Una. Miss Reed told the story girl that she loves to see him sitting there as it reminds her the strength of love can outlast death, but that sometimes she gets an eerie feeling as if Una is there with him too, in spirit. Sarah Ray, with shades of our romantic young Anne Shirley here, says she thinks it would be so romantic to die young and have your lover make a pilgrimage to your garden every year. But Felicity sort of scoffs at this and says it would have been better to live and get married. Quote, Mother says all these sentimental ideas are bosh, and I expect they are. But Felicity does wonder out loud why Miss Reed doesn't have a beau herself, since she's so very lovely. The story girl says it's because no one in Carlisle is good enough for her, except, but then she cuts herself off and refuses to tell them who she is thinking of. So, this little exchange actually makes me think specifically about Maud here in this conversation between Sarah Ray and Felicity. At the point in which Maud was writing this book, she would have been recently married to Ewan MacDonald, which was a practical move on her part rather than a romantic one. We know that her true love was Herman Leard, whom she had a passionate love for, but he died shortly after they broke it off. So, in this way, she's living more what Felicity is suggesting rather than continuing to be dedicated to Herman Leard's memory. Although it's clear from her journals and the way that Herman keeps sneaking into her writing that she has stayed true to him in her own way. Well, now it's June and it's time for Aunt Olivia's wedding. There's all the usual excitement as Felicity readies herself to help her mother prepare a feast that so fine a person as the governor's wife will eat. And the boys conspire to ensure that they get some of the most choice food before it runs out. Sarah Ray is sure her mother won't let her sit with her friends, but she's glad she's going to get to go at all. There's the threat of rain, but eventually the sky clears to a radiant day.
Now, this is hilarious. The night before the wedding, Sarah Ray is stung by wasps.
Poor
Having
Sarah Ray.
this kid cannot catch a break. And so she arrives at the wedding absolutely covered in stings. Her mother at this point just sends her to the kids' table so she doesn't have to explain what happened to her.
She's so embarrassed by her poor swollen child.
So Sarah Ray ends up having a very nice time at the wedding, sitting at the kids' table with all her friends.
Oh, baby.
The wedding is perfect. Quote, it was a pretty scene. The air was full of the perfume of apple bloom, and the bees blundered foolishly and delightfully from one blossom to another, half drunken with perfume. The old orchard was full of smiling guests in wedding garments. Aunt Olivia was most beautiful amid the frost of her bridal veil, and the story girl, in an unusually long white dress with her brown curls clubbed up behind, looked so tall and so grown up that we hardly recognized her. Now, I love that the story girl got to be part of the wedding, but this is a bit of a turning point as we start to see the story girl becoming a grown up. Nevertheless, the kids all have a marvelous time, and as the couple leaves the party, Dan and Peter chase them down the lane, banging pans and ringing bells, which horrifies Felicity but delights the bride and groom. The next day, this is so interesting to me. Peg Bowen comes by the house for leftovers.
Peg knows what's up.
Like, she wasn't invited to the wedding, but she comes over for leftovers, very specifically saying, she's like, well, the King family never skimps out on a wedding, so I knew that there would be food here. And on her way out, Peg notices Sarah Ray's stung face and her warty little hands, and she prescribes a remedy of rubbing a halved potato on her hands under the full moon, chanting a rhyme, and burying the potato with the proviso that anyone else who touches that potato will get warts. I would also believe that Peg was a witch between her prophecies and her wishbones and her potatoes, like all these old wives' tales put together. She's definitely magical.
Fortunately for Sarah Ray, her warts heal in time for the school concert. There's some discussion from the children as to whether this was the result of Peg's remedy or if they just cleared up on their own. Each of the children get to perform a recitation for the concert, except Dan, who's like, nope, flatly refuses. And some of them were feeling nervous. Sarah Ray, predictably, is absolutely a mess, while Felicity and the story girl were feeling relatively assured. Cecily was afraid she was going to faint and decided that the fortification she needed was curls. Cecily had been dying for curly hair ever since we first met her, but she had given up her usual Sunday night curl paper routine when they were praying for Peter to survive the measles. She hasn't curled it since then. However, on this special occasion, she's decided God's probably okay with it. She doesn't need to make that sacrifice anymore. And she decides to wear curl papers overnight while soaking her hair in a special curling fluid that Sarah Ray has. When she goes to take them out the next morning, her hair is shellacked to her head. And it turns out that Sarah Ray brought over not curling fluid, but mucilage. And mucilage is essentially glue. This is not good. And again, can we point out that half the mischief in Maud's book could have been prevented with some clear labels?
It's so funny to me that Sarah Ray's house seems to have the exact same problem as Marilla's kitchen and the King family kitchen.
Exactly. Nobody is labeling what is in what bottle. In any case, poor Cecily, her hair has to be soaked and shampooed within an inch of its life. She's subject to both her mother's and Felicity's chastisement, as well as the sure knowledge that her hair is going to look like a haystack for having been freshly and harshly shampooed.
Same Cecily. She and I clearly have the same curse of having straight, dry hair.
Cecily thinks she's being punished for vanity, and Felicity agrees.
Okay, Felicity.
Narrator Beth thinks the same thing, and he snarkily reminds us that Felicity is one of the vainest girls who ever lived. Sarah Ray feels very stupid, but Cecily is sweetly forgiving of her little friend. The recital goes off more or less as one would expect. Peter pauses when grammatically appropriate. Cecily is so distracted by her hair, she actually forgets to be nervous about her piece and does fairly well. Sarah Ray manages to get through her piece in her own nervous way. Felicity recites her piece, quote, without haste, without rest, and absolutely without any expression whatsoever. And I'm sure is quite well pleased by it. She's like, I didn't forget any of the words.
Very, very on brand for Felicity. By the time it's the story girl's turn, it's clear that everyone knows that she's going to close out the show with a bang, and they sort of settle in knowing they're in good hands.
Anybody who's put together the school talent show knows.
Yep.
Right? They've sat through all the middle acts there. You got to open the show with a banger and close the show with a banger.
Yes, absolutely right. Everyone knows that if you are the last kid or the last act at the talent show, this is going to be the good one. So that's where the story girl is. So she recites this very well-known piece about a Florentine lady in an age of old who was thought to be dead and was so buried in her family's tomb. Then she wakes up in the tomb. She's not actually dead. It's actually really eerie. But at the climax of the story, there's this courtroom scene, and the judge is to pronounce the woman legally dead at the height of sort of the dramatic tension. So the story girl is telling the story, weaving this like creepy emotional tale, and it's building and building in dramatic intensity. And finally, she speaks the chilling line, "The court pronounces the defendant," and then she pauses for effect. And during the pause, Sarah Ray's shrill little voice prompts her, "Dead!" So this utterly takes the wind from the story girl's sails, and the story ends with a thud.
Oh, instead of a dramatic conclusion.
She thought that the story girl forgot what she was supposed to say.
Sarah Ray, has the story girl ever once in her life forgotten her line?
Nope. Oh, so good. Felicity, who really is just like, she's so antagonistic in this book. She berates poor Sarah Ray. Sarah Ray genuinely thought she was helping, and the story girl is rightfully angry at her. Sarah Ray is bursting into tears. I mean, it's just hysterics all over the place. But later that night, as Bev is getting himself ready for bed, the story girl comes by and knocks on his door and tells him that she needs him for an adventure. She's left her coral necklace at the concert, and the two of them must go get it before the cleaners come, and they're scheduled to come early the next morning. So Bev agrees, and the two take a midnight walk through the countryside back to the school. It's this really beautiful chapter that just describes the almost supernatural glamour of the countryside at night. The story girl finds her necklace and decides not to be so angry at Sarah Ray, and then she and Bev decide to keep their little nocturnal jaunt a secret for just the two of them. Next up, we get some more excerpts from Our magazine. It begins with the frank admission that no one has made the honor roll since no one has been able to keep up with their New Year's resolutions. Peter shares a story about the locket that was baked, in which his Aunt Jane's grandmother, when she was a little girl, saved a precious locket from a would-be thief by baking the locket in a loaf of bread. Sarah Ray contributes a very strange story about thinking that a snake was a ribbon. Yikes. And there's an anonymous poem that was composed of Felicity for her birthday, asking to be, quote, your faithful knight. I think we have a guess who that could be from.
Well, one Sunday evening in July, the kids go to evening services at church, unattended by Uncle Alec and Aunt Janet, who had already been in the morning. They arrive at church a little early, which gives the story girl time to place flowers on her mother's grave. The kids file into church, take their place in the family pew, and then all of a sudden, Peg Bowen turns up in church. She takes her seat right among the King cousins between Felicity and the story girl, and then begins a long and hilarious monologue about nearly everyone in church. Peg goes on about who has money, how they got it, who has none and is pretending otherwise, who is ungenerous, who has too much pride, who is falsely pious, and whose brother put rat poison in the pancakes. There doesn't seem to be anyone left in the church that Peg does not have some kind of dirt on, and she shares it all in church in a normal speaking voice to the King cousins as they wait for the minister's arrival. The kids are mortified. And Peg knows it, but she says she's only saying out loud what everyone else is thinking. Once the minister arrives, Peg stops her diatribe, thankfully. But then, halfway through the minister's sermon, she gets up, loudly declares it's too boring, and leaves. But not before telling the congregation writ large that there are too many hypocrites under one roof in this church, so it's unfit for decent people.
The summer continues on, and one fine August day, the children are sitting around the pulpit stone with Miss Alice Reed when Bev notices a beautiful ring on the third finger of her left hand. He asks the story girl about it later, who mysteriously tells him it's a story that's not ready to be told yet. Then Cecily tells the group that she's sure that she's never going to finish her autograph quilt because Peg's bow and square isn't paid for, and so she makes up her mind to go to Mr. Campbell to ask for a square.
Recall from the previous book that Mr. Campbell is a notorious child-hating crank, although he was charmed by the story girl. Cecily asks Bev to go with her for moral support, and the two of them tramp through the fields on a beautiful summer day and discuss between them the fact that their little group is changing since the story girl is 15 and almost grown up. Well, the two of them turn up at Mr. Campbell's, and Cecily bravely requests a donation. Mr. Campbell refuses, saying he never gives to foreign missions. Then Mr. Campbell gives Cecily a bit of a challenge. He's of the opinion that people only do charitable work when it's easy or interesting for them, but won't actually make a real sacrifice for the cause. Cecily says she earnestly cares about foreign mission work and would make a real sacrifice. So Mr. Campbell dares her to prove it. He dares her to attend church on Sunday in the clothes she's wearing right now, a faded print dress, a shabby sun hat, worn shoes, and says if she does so, he'll make a donation of $5, a huge sum when Cecily had only been asking for 10 cents. Cecily is daunted by this. She understands that propriety matters. Her mother will need to be told, and to some extent, her reputation will be at stake. But she also wants to prove that she is willing to make a real sacrifice for a cause she cares about. And she wants to have as many names on her quilt as her classmate Kitty. So she agrees.
So on Sunday, though, Cecily dresses for church in her old, worn out clothes, while, of course, Felicity looks as beautiful as ever. And honestly, it sounds like she might have even taken some extra lengths to make herself look prettier than usual. Felicity also swears that she won't sit next to her sister, and she reminds Cecily of all the people who will be there to judge her. Felicity. Cecily is starting to lose her nerve as they're waiting for their cousin, the story girl. But then the story girl comes downstairs, and she is also dressed in an old dress and heavy, rough shoes. The story girl is not going to let Cecily go through this ordeal alone, and so together they endure the curious glances of the congregation. Mr. Campbell, true to his word, paid up right after church, and the story girl chided him for his unfair challenge. He admitted to the girls that he didn't think Cecily's missionary zeal would win out over vanity, and even now he's not sure if it was truly the Christian mission or just the King family spunk that led her to live up to her end of the bargain. But Mr. Campbell instructed Cecily to give his signature a place of prominence on her quilt.
One morning, the story girl announces that in a fortnight, Miss Reed is going to marry the awkward man. Her cousins stunned. They think this is impossible given just how shy the awkward man is. Story Girl tells them that both Miss Reed and the awkward man, whose real name is Jasper Dale, have independently confirmed it to her and told her their sides of the story. The children beg to hear the story. Sure, it will be romantic and interesting since this pairing strikes them as very unlikely. The story girl tells them she doesn't know how to tell it properly and that it's a story that deserves to be told well. Quote, it's very beautiful, but it might sound ridiculous if it wasn't told just exactly the right way, she explains. Bev tells us that 40 years later, after he learned that Jasper Dale was dead, he asked the story girl to share the story of Miss Reed and the awkward man. The chapter that follows is this retelling, apparently penned by a 55-year-old Sarah Stanley.
The story goes that Jasper Dale lived alone at his farm, called Golden Milestone, for some 20 years after his mother passed away. He lived alone, had no friends or company, rarely spoke to men, and never spoke to women, and was generally considered odd by all the village and called the awkward man. Now, he had a good farm and a large garden, he was known to be a reader, but for the most part, people left him alone, which was as he preferred. Jasper Dale did keep a housekeeper, Mrs. Griggs, who occasionally came by to clean, and in that farmhouse was one room that was always locked. Mrs. Griggs believed it was an unfinished room and didn't think much of it, although she always tried the handle. One day, she found the door unlocked and let herself in. We discussed this in our recap of The Story Girl, that Mrs. Griggs found a room elegantly appointed and fitted out in all kinds of feminine finery, with lace curtains and beautiful art, a bookcase full of pretty books, and a little work basket with a pair of tiny scissors and a silver thimble. There's a watercolor of a lovely woman's face, a vase full of fresh flowers, and a beautiful blue tea gown and sweet little slippers. The books in the bookcase all bore the name Alice on the leaves. The story girl tells us that Jasper Dale was a man of a richly romantic nature who had a big and beautiful imagination. In his young adulthood, he became convinced that he would never find true love, and in his imagination, he began to invent a love story for himself. He gave this dream woman the name Alice, and in his flights of fancy, he spoke to her, and she back to him. On a visit to Charlottetown, he saw the watercolor in the window of a store, and it struck him that this was the face of his dreamed of love. He bought it, he had to have it, but he didn't know where he could put it in his house. Then he decided he would fit up that little room for his dream woman, Alice. He went to work, secretly and slowly, carrying out the plan of furnishing the room for the love of his life who existed only in his imagination. He selected everything by hand and decorated the room carefully. Once the room was finished, he treated it as if it belonged to a lady, and would even knock before going inside. Then Alice Reed, the real flesh and blood Alice Reed, came to teach music in Carlisle. She boarded with the family in the adjoining farm, and Jasper Dale saw her one morning while he was working in his garden. In a moment, he knew that it was his dream woman come to life. Maybe not down to her exact features, but in her grace and coloring and expression, she was the same. He was too shy to greet her, but she gave him a little smile anyway. Jasper Dale had been in the habit of bringing flowers to the picture of the dream Alice in her room and speaking to her as if she was there to listen to him. But when he met the real Alice, he stopped. He still gathered flowers, though, and scattered them on the paths where he knew she walked. She found them and knew they were from him. And one night she came to him in his garden to thank him. He was still shy and awkward, but they managed to have a short conversation about books and he lent her one. Then he started walking with her up the hill, not quite all the way to the farm where she boarded, but sort of halfway between their houses. And this went on pretty much all summer, and they are enjoying each other's company and they're slowly falling in love. Well, Alice is slowly falling in love. I think it's safe to say that Jasper was in love from moment one. Now, remember that Jasper was in the habit of having conversations out loud with his dream woman. So, one late August day, he is doing exactly that. Except it's an imaginary conversation with the real Alice outside in his garden. He professes his love, unafraid, and says that in his dreams they are together. It's a lovely, vulnerable little speech, and the real Alice happens to overhear the whole thing. Jasper is furious when he realizes she has overheard him. He is sure that she will mock him and that his dream of her can never be real. But she assures him that she was glad to hear his speech, for she does love him, and she knows that this is the only way he could have ever told her. They confess their mutual love, and they kiss in the garden.
Oh. Returning back to the main timeline of the book, the King cousins are excited for their second wedding of the summer. The story girl tells Bev that Miss Reed deserves lovely weather for her wedding and everything good. She also tells Bev she had a dream last night where someone was calling her name, a voice she knew but couldn't place. As the kids go outside, they notice a man sleeping in a hammock. It's no one Bev knew, but the story girl recognized him as her father. Bev runs to tell Aunt Janet that Uncle Blair, the story girl's father, has come back, and Aunt Janet immediately wonders out loud if he's come to take Sarah. Blair is charming. While he's fundamentally different than the hardworking PEI farmers, he's worldly and bohemian, they do like him. He spends the day with the children, being a child at heart himself, and regales them with stories of his travels. He seems struck by how grown up his daughter is and how much time has passed since he last saw everyone. After a beautiful day welcoming home Uncle Blair and celebrating the newlyweds, the story girl announces to her cousins that she will be going to Paris with her father when he returns. She'll finish her schooling there. She will leave in a month, and the children decide to enjoy themselves as much as possible before she goes. She will be leaving around the same time that Peter will return to his family as well. So this is now a true bend in the road for this little gang. The kids all reminisce about all the fun times they've had together. And then later that evening, Bev and the story girl come upon Uncle Blair in the orchard, equally lost in reminiscence of the story girl's mother. The children's last month together is October, and it's a gorgeous one. Maud gives us one of her most deliciously descriptive passages in this chapter, where the story girl Bev and Uncle Blair take an autumnal ramble through the forest. Uncle Blair sketches the light on the brook. The story girl tells Bev a story, and there's this beautiful interplay of creativity and art and soul and nature. Bev is reveling in it and says he will remember this day for years to come. It reminds us a little of Anne's birthday picnic in Anne of Avonlea, an exquisite chapter that captures an idyllic day. Yet, despite the perfect beauty of the day, for Uncle Blair, there's pain in his memories of his wife. He calls out to her in the night, and it's clear he can't stay in Carlisle or on the island. As much as he can appreciate the splendor of the landscape here, it is too full of loss and grief for him, even all these years later.
We start closing down the book and our time with the King family with a little dose of sorrow, the kind of milestone that all of us have in our lives. Their beloved feline companion, Patty, dies. He turns up deathly sick. They suspect he ate something poisonous, and it's clear he cannot be helped, but has struggled home to be with his people. The story girl gathers him up and he passes away in her arms. The children are all distraught and sad, and they pay tribute to him with a funeral in the orchard that evening. Although they debate if the traditional funeral prayers and hymns are appropriate for a cat, they do decide that Peter will carve a stone marker for his grave. It's yet another mark of how time is passing. The children are growing up and separating and leaving this particularly golden time of life. And as if to add another change to the tally, Bev and Felix hear from their father that he will be returning to take them back to Toronto in the next month. They too will be leaving Carlisle. Everyone is grimly accepting of this new twist. Cecily, Dan, and Felicity are all glum that everyone is leaving them. Cecily says, "Thank goodness there are no more fathers to come back." Wow. Wow, Cecily. The kids lean into preparing their last magazine, and as they discuss that this will be yet another end, the story girl seems to be inspired by the gift of prophecy. She declares that Bev will be a real newspaper editor someday, and when Felicity challenges her, she says, "Oh, I can tell futures. I know what's going to happen to all of you. Shall I tell you? Bev says she should, so they can compare them to what really happens and see if she's right. She takes up the challenge, and she says that Bev will write books too and travel all over the world. She says Felix will be fat his whole life, but he will have a long black beard and be a grandfather before he's 50. She she says that Peter will be a minister and Dan will be a farmer and marry a girl whose name begins with K, and he will have 11 children. And he will vote grit. Dan, by the way, hotly disputes the political implications here. She says Felicity will marry a minister, be a perfect housekeeper, and will be very happy. Felicity blushes, and Peter looks pleased. Sarah Ray asks for her future, and, quote, the story girl looked rather puzzled. It was so hard to imagine Sarah Ray as having any kind of a future. So, womp womp.
Right. She doesn't even get like a future where you're like, I don't know. I
No.
haven't thought about you at all.
So the story girl throws sort of a stab in the dark and says that Sarah Ray will live to be 100, she'll attend many funerals and have many sick spells, and will finally learn not to cry so much by the time she's 70. Cecily asks for her fortune, and the story girl's face grows distant and sad, and she tells her that she couldn't tell any fortune even half as good as what Cecily deserves. But when Cecily pushes, the story girl says that everyone she meets will love her for as long as she lives. The kids disperse for home, and adult Bev reflects and wonders if the story girl did have a flash of foresight that day, and did she realize that Cecily would never live to grow into adulthood?
Then we come to the final issue of our magazine. The final edition includes a lovely obituary for Patty, a wild fiction story from Peter, who thus far has resisted writing any fiction despite being the fiction editor. The personals page includes farewells to all the departing kings and the news that Cecily has raised the most money with her missionary quilt square.
With that $5.
That would definitely put her over the top. And she definitely had the most notable names. Then it is the final evening of all the children gathered together. Uncle Blair and the story girl will be leaving the next day. They wander together through all their favorite places and return to their usual gathering place by the old well and eat Felicity's jam turnovers. The kids are all reckoning with the fact that they may never be all together ever again. And if they do, it's likely to be only after they're all grown up. They reminisce on their adventures together and finish by pledging eternal friendship and singing Auld Lang Syne together. The story girl asks them not to say goodbye to her in the morning. It just seems too final and hopeless of a word. She asks them to just wave and smile. Early in the morning, everyone is up early to say goodbye. The awkward man and Alice are there to bid farewell, the awkward man giving her another old book. Sarah Ray is too sick to come up, but has sent a note full of woeful italics in her stead. Felicity is fighting back tears. And they all wave goodbye as Uncle Blair and the story girl drive away. They continue to stand there even as the carriage disappears, knowing there will be one last glance as it goes around the last curve past the wood. And then the story girl is gone, and the book is done.
Well, a lot happens in this book, so let's skip over some of our other segments, no puff sleeve or birch path for us today, and wind up with a quick inspired by. This time, of course, we are inspired by the Golden Road. And I, for one, am inspired. Well, maybe inspired is too strong a word, but I certainly understand Cecily's hair distress in this book. And as someone whose hair holds a curl for about 6 seconds, I feel you, Cecily. And I swear I have tried everything under the sun. And you know what? For some of us, curls are just not in the picture. But what I do know is conditioners. And my recommendation for Cecily to avoid having to recite with hair like dry hay is a conditioner called Angel Rinse by Kevin Murphy. This stuff is super expensive, and I honestly only ever use it for like the first few weeks after I do a full highlight and my hair is half hair, half bleach. But it is both lightweight and also deeply moisturizing, so it's not going to weigh your hair down too much. It's a hard combo to find. And it smells amazing. Now, I'm not that picky. Once my hair calms down, I really will use whatever. I like Costco's Kirkland brand conditioner quite a lot, and that is $10 for a full liter. But that Angel Rinse stuff, all $40 for 8 ounces of it or whatever, is the best on your fresh highlights.
Thanks to all of the beautiful nature in this book and the springing all over the place, I am going to recommend our new spring buy that we just got for our house. This was totally an impulse buy. We're in Costco, and there was one of those bird feeders with the built-in Wi-Fi camera right there. So we had to get it. It was the Evergreen Solar Smart Bird Feeder, and it was like $100 at Costco. and it is solar powered, which is very cool. So it's got Wi-Fi and a camera, and you can like attach it to your phone, and you can get a little alert every time a bird lands at your feeder and open the camera and watch the birds eating the bird seed. And it is so cute. And even though my husband was like hemming and hawing about it a little bit as we were in the checkout lane, always the place for second thoughts at Costco.
Right.
He attached his iPad to the feed, and while he's working in his office, he has the iPad next to him to watch and see the birds as they come to the bird feeder.
I love it so much, all the little birdies.
So that is the Evergreen Solar Smart Bird Feeder, and I love it. Well, let's wind up our episode. Kindred Spirits, thank you so much for being here with us. Please join us in 2 weeks for another episode of the Kindred Spirits Book Club. We will be continuing our discussion of The Golden Road. Be sure to subscribe to Kindred Spirits Book Club wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. And don't forget, you can still get a free Kindred Spirits Book Club sticker by leaving us a review or sharing about us on social media. Just email us or DM us on Instagram to tell us that you did that. Thanks so much, Kindred Spirits.
Goodbye, kindred spirits.